The night was heavy with mist, and the sound of boots crushing gravel echoed like a warning through the hollow silence of the back road. A faint glow of fire torches flickered between the trees, and the man stood alone by the broken fence, breathing, slow, steady breaths that did not belong to a frightened victim, but to someone who had long mastered the art of silence and control. His eyes fixed on the shifting shadows, moving closer through the woods, shapes of men in hoods, their voices, rough and cracked from whiskey and hate, calling out insults, laughing, swearing, promising blood before the night was over. He did not move. His shoulders relaxed but firm, his broad frame blending into the night as though he belonged to it, every movement calculated, every muscle trained for patience. His calmness in that moment was strange, because any other man would have run, screamed, begged, or prayed, yet he only waited, as if this scene was something he had walked into by choice, as if fate itself had been rehearsed 1,000 times before, and the truth was, fate had brought him here. But fate had no idea who he really was. One of the men stepped forward, a large figure carrying a shotgun over his shoulder, his hood pulled low, his voice breaking through the night with ugly authority. "We told you once before, boy, you don't belong here. You should have packed your bags. You should have gone back to wherever you crawled out of." His voice carried arrogance, the kind of confidence that came from numbers, because behind him more hoods moved in, circling slowly, confident they had a victim cornered, confident the night belonged to them. The man by the fence remained silent, his jaw set, his hands loose at his sides, the moonlight barely catching the sharp lines of his face, revealing scars that whispered of battles far from this place, scars no one here could imagine, scars earned in deserts and jungles, in broken villages where survival was not a game of hate but of war itself, scars that told a story no one in those hoods would ever understand. And still he waited, letting them believe the lie that he was powerless. The mob crept closer, and one of the younger ones, reckless, eager to prove himself, hurled a rock. The stone struck the wooden post inches from the man's head, splinters breaking loose, but the man did not flinch. Not a single muscle betrayed him. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, watching, calculating, memorizing each face, each stance, every detail he might need if this night demanded what he already knew. It might demand. The leader smirked, raising his hand to quiet the laughter of his men, his voice calm but venomous. "You think standing there makes you brave? You think you can stare us down? You got no friends here, no one to help you, and by morning, you'll be nothing but a lesson carved into the dirt." The man finally shifted, just a step forward, just enough for his voice to carry, deep and controlled. "You talk too much," he said, and though the words were simple, the tone carried weight, a chilling authority, like someone used to commanding men who carried weapons and followed orders without question, the kind of voice that made the bravado of the mob falter. If only for a moment. The leader sneered, covering his hesitation with a spit into the dirt. "You think you scare me, boy? You're one man. We're 20. Do the math." The man's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile, more like a shadow of one, cold and fleeting. "I did the math before I came here," he answered, his eyes locked on the shotgun, then drifting to the weak points in the circle, the nervous hands, the shifting feet, the uneven breathing of men who wanted violence but had never truly met it face to face. The silence stretched, broken only by the rustle of wind through the trees. And then the leader raised his hand high, ready to signal the strike, when suddenly, from deeper in the woods came a howl, sharp and chilling, and the mob turned instinctively, their attention split for just an instant. The man moved, not fast in a way the eye could follow, but fast in a way that came from years of training where hesitation meant death. His hand struck the shotgun barrel, twisting it sideways, the wood cracking against the leader's ribs. The weapon disarmed before the mob could process what had happened. The leader stumbled back, gasping, his authority shattered in a single heartbeat. The younger ones froze, unsure, because the story they had told themselves, that this man was prey, was cracking at the edges. Fear crept into their bravado, and though numbers were still on their side, the energy had shifted, the air thick with something far more dangerous than their torches, something primal. The man stood with the shotgun in his hands, now his posture steady, his voice low. "You chose the wrong night," he said. And though his words were quiet, they carried like thunder across the circle, settling into their bones, because in that moment, they realized what they were facing was not a victim, not a target. but a predator disguised as a man. For the first time, hesitation spread among them, eyes darting, some shifting backward, none willing to be the first to test him again. Yet pride and hate are heavy chains, and the leader, clutching his side, forced a laugh through his pain. "Don't think this changes anything. We'll come again, we'll burn you out." The man leveled his gaze, and though he said nothing, the leader's words faltered, swallowed by the weight of silence. The kind of silence that tells you you're standing in front of something you don't understand. The torches hissed in the damp night, smoke rising, like spirits, the circle broken now, tension sharp as glass, and deep inside each of those men, a single thought began to grow, a thought they would never say aloud, but it echoed all the same. They were not hunting him. He was waiting for them. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain, and somewhere in the distance thunder rumbled, low and heavy, a storm building on the horizon, and with it came the unshakable feeling that this night was only the beginning, that what had just happened was not an ending at all, but the first move in a game none of them had been ready to play. And the man, standing alone with the shotgun in hand, scarred face unflinching, eyes burning with a secret none of them could guess, knew that the real hunt was yet to come. The storm finally arrived, sweeping across the valley with wind that bent, trees and rain that soaked the dirt until it turned to mud. Lightning cracked the sky open in jagged veins of light, and the mob scattered back toward their trucks, their torches sputtering in the downpour, curses flying through the night as their leader clutched his side, dragging himself through the storm while throwing threats that were drowned by thunder. Yet none of those words mattered, because deep down in the hollow of their chests, they all carried the same sickness now. Fear. The man watched them retreat, standing tall in the rain, with the stolen shotgun heavy in his grip, his eyes cold, his body motionless, his breath steady even as the storm lashed against him. He looked like a statue carved out of the night, and when the last of the headlights vanished beyond the trees, only then did he move, lowering the weapon, and slipping it under the fence where the mud would swallow it whole, erasing the evidence of this encounter, because he knew too well that proof was not always protection, and in this town, the law bent under the weight of prejudice. He turned toward the small cabin standing alone on the hill, its windows glowing faintly, the only warmth in miles of darkness, and as he climbed the slope, his boots dragging heavy with water and mud, he felt the ache of memory press against his chest, the kind of ache that did not come from rain or cold, but from ghosts that never left, ghosts that wore the faces of brothers lost in deserts and jungles, voices that echoed in his mind every time he heard hate dressed as courage, every time he saw men gather in groups convinced they were strong when they had never faced real war. Inside the cabin, the light came from an old lamp, its glow soft across the wood walls, the air warm with the faint smell of coffee that had gone cold on the table, and he stepped inside quietly, closing the door against the storm, his eyes landing on the photograph. Above the mantel, a picture of a woman smiling, her arm wrapped around him in a world that seemed lifetimes away, her eyes alive with fire, her smile wide enough to banish every shadow. Yet that smile existed only in this frame now, because she had been taken from him long before tonight, and her absence was the wound that never closed. He sat at the table, water dripping from his clothes, his hand pressing against the scar across his ribs, a scar earned in silence, no medal pinned for it, no parade to honor it, just another mark, carved into skin during a mission that never existed on paper. And he remembered the words spoken to him by his commander before they went dark into enemy territory, words that rang true tonight more than ever. A soldier's greatest weapon is patience, because every enemy reveals themselves in time. Patience. Yes, he thought. Patience was survival. Patience was how he had lived when the rest of his unit had not. Patience was how he would live now, because the clan would not forget what happened. Tonight, they would return, angrier, more desperate to prove their power. And they would not come with rocks and shotguns next time. They would come with fire and numbers, and maybe even with the silent blessing of those in authority who claimed justice but drank hate in secret. His hand tightened on the edge of the table, veins rising against his skin, and for a moment, anger clawed through his chest, raw and violent, because he had promised her he would leave that world behind. Promised her. No more missions, no more blood, no more wars. But now war was on his doorstep, crawling in the dark with masks and torches, and he could not keep that promise, not when silence meant surrender, not when surrender meant erasure of everything. He still stood forth, door creaked with the push of wind, and his body tensed, every nerve sharpened, hand reaching instinctively for the knife tucked under his belt. But it was only the storm, slamming branches against the walls, howling through cracks in the wood, and he exhaled slowly, the knife lowering, though his mind never eased, because he knew nights like this were tests, and he had been tested before, tested until his body broke, until his soul cracked. Yet still he lived. Still he carried the burden of memory, and maybe this storm was just another trial meant to shape what came next. Hours bled into each other, the rain steady, the thunder rolling like artillery across the sky, and when dawn crept slowly through the fog, painting the cabin in pale grey light, he had not slept, his eyes fixed on the window, his body motionless but ready, waiting for headlights, waiting for footsteps, waiting for the next move, but none came, only the sound of birds returning. Cautious at first, then louder as the storm passed. He stood and moved to the porch. The world washed clean yet heavy with the memory of what had just unfolded. The dirt still stamped with boot prints. The fence broken where the shotgun had been taken. The grass flattened by torches that had burned bright only hours before. And he knew the silence was not safety. It was only the pause between strikes. The calm before another wave. Down the hill, near the tree line, something caught his eye. A flash of white fabric tangled in the branches, torn and soaked, and he moved quickly, boots heavy in the wet earth, until he reached it, pulling the cloth free, his jaw tightening when he realized what it was, part of a hood ripped in the struggle, stained with mud, and as he held it in his hand, something sharp gleamed at its edge, a chain, thin but heavy, with a pendant carved into a crude cross. He turned it in his palm, studying it, because it was not just a trinket, it was a mark, a sign of belonging, proof of the group that had come for him. And suddenly, he felt the weight of choice pressing on him like the storm itself. He could walk away, vanish like smoke, leave this place behind before the next attack came, or he could stay, stand his ground, fight not just for himself, but for the memory of her, for the promise that hate would not take root here, not if he had breath left in his body. The decision came not in words, but in the slow tightening of his fist around the chain, in the set of his jaw, in the silent vow that pulsed through him like blood. And in that vow he knew what had to be done. He could not wait for them to come again, because patience was only part of survival. Sometimes survival meant striking first. He lifted his eyes to the horizon where the town lay hidden beyond the trees, a town that pretended calm in daylight but whispered poison in shadows, a town where men wore smiles by day and hoods by night, and he felt the fire rise inside him, not the fire of revenge alone, but of justice, raw and personal, and he knew his next step would not be waiting, it would be hunting. Yet as he turned back toward the cabin, a sound froze him in place, a snap of a branch too deliberate to be the wind, a movement in the tree line too quick to be an animal, and his hand went instantly to the knife, his breath steady, his heart slow, his eyes narrowing at the shadows. Someone was out there, watching, waiting, testing him. And in that moment the truth burned clear. The hunt had already begun, only this time he was not the one being hunted. He was the one drawing them in. He did not rush the shadow in the trees. He became still as the trunk beside him, counting the wind in his lungs and the raindrops sliding from the leaves. Then he slipped sideways through the wet brush with the silence of a hunting cat, a hand to the moss for balance. The knife hilt cool against his palm, and when the figure shifted again, he was already behind it. An arm hooked, a wrist turned, a breath hitched, and a soft cry stifled by his other hand. As he pressed the stranger to the mud without cruelty and without hesitation, "Take off the hood," he said, voice low, and the hood came away to reveal a boy with rain-plastering brown hair to his forehead, freckles washed pale, eyes too wide for this night, a cheap phone trembling in his hand, the kind of face that had not yet learned how permanent choices can be when hate calls itself tradition. "Please," the boy whispered, "I did not come to hurt you. I came to see if you were still alive. I came to tell you they will come back at sundown. They want to make a show of it. They want to turn your home into a warning. They want the town to know who runs the dark here." "Who sent you?" he asked, tightening his grip just enough to keep the boy honest. "No one," the boy said, then his gaze fell, his lip shook, and the truth slipped out like a wound. "My cousin wears the cross, the one you found. Wade gave it to him when he was sworn. Wade is my uncle. "You hurt him last night. He will not forgive that. He never forgives. He keeps a ledger, every mark and name. He says a debt is a holy thing." "Wade," the man repeated, testing the name on his tongue like a blade edge, and something inside him clicked into place. The church deacon with the clean suit and the clean smile. The hand that gripped shoulders too hard when photographs were taken. On courthouse steps, the voice that blessed meals while counting sins that were not his to count. The same man who had spoken soft words at the funeral. A memory that cut him now like rusted wire, because those words had always felt wrong. Too smooth, too practiced. "Why are you here if he owns your fear?" the man asked, and the boy swallowed, trying to form courage out of rain and shame. "Because I did not join," he said. "I told them no. I told my cousin I would not wear a hood. And last night when you took the gun away, I felt something crack, like the story we were told had holes in it. I saw the way you moved, not like prey. And I thought if I say nothing then I am the same as them, so I came to warn you. Though I know warning you might not be enough." The man searched the boy's face and saw trembling. Yes, but also a stubborn ember, a small refusal that could grow. If given air, he eased his hold and let the boy sit up, mud streaking his knees, hands clutching the phone like a talisman. "Tell me where they meet," the man said. "Tell me who carries the real weight behind Wade. Names, trucks, routes." And the boy answered in a rush, as if the words might burn if held too long. "The feed store. After dark when the shutters are down. The old sawmill road, if they want to lose tails. The sheriff's brother keeps the keys to the back lot." Pastor Cole turns his eyes away. "Not every time, but enough to matter." "The sheriff's brother," the man repeated, a thread tightening, and the boy nodded. "He stands 2 rows behind the pulpit, always smiling, always clapping loud. When Wade speaks." The man lifted the torn hood and the chain with its crude cross and placed them in the boy's hand. "Keep these safe," he said. "Proof is a fragile thing in a town that pretends not to see, but sometimes a single piece of truth can tip the weight of a story." The boy nodded, staring at the objects as if they were burning through his palm, then looked up with sudden fear. "If they knew I came here, they would break me. They would break my mother too." "Go home by the creek," the man said. "Stay off the road. If anyone asks, you were helping your grandfather fix the fence, and tell your mother to keep the house dark tonight. If she hears tires on gravel, hide." The boy stood, shaking, then paused. "There is something else," he whispered. "Wade says what happened to your wife was God's plan, and he smiles when he says it. And sometimes he drinks from a silver flask and says the road bends for those who can pay. Then he laughs, and I hate that laugh." The man's breath did not change, but the world inside him tilted, like a deck under sudden surf. The cabin seemed to shift, the trees to lean. Grief rose fast and hot, grief braided with a colder thread that felt like wire pulled tight. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady because soldiers learned to keep rivers from spilling. "Now go." When the boy was gone, swallowed by the wet green, the man stood alone beneath the lifting clouds and let the pain pass through him without drowning him. He had suspected before, in the nights when sleep would not come, that the crash on the county road had been more than misfortune. The skid marks too clean, the patrol report too thin, the way Wade's condolences tasted like old pennies in his mouth. Now suspicion had teeth, and those teeth cut away the last softness he had allowed himself to keep. He went into town as the sky cleared to a dull silver, his jacket hood up, his stride unhurried. The streets were scrubbed by rain, the diner neon humming, the smell of coffee and buttered toast leaking into the morning. He sat in the corner booth with his back to the wall, a habit learned and never forgotten, and waited while the waitress set a mug down with a tired smile and left him to the quiet. A man at the counter read a paper and pretended not to glance. A pair of farmhands argued low about feed prices. A deputy in a damp uniform stirred his cup with a little too much force. The bell over the door chimed, and a woman stepped in, mid-40s, hair pulled into a messy knot, eyes sharp as winter glass. She carried a paper bag and a look that said she had stopped expecting kindness from this town a long time ago. She walked past his booth without hesitation and slid the bag onto the seat across from him. "Open it," she said softly, and when he did, he found a small tin. Inside the tin, a wedding band with a scratch in the shape of a crescent. His chest tightened, his fingers went still. "Where did you get this?" he asked, and the woman's mouth trembled. "From the lost and found drawer no one ever checks," she said. It was turned in after the crash with no name. The note with it said found by mile marker 19, and that is not where the patrol said the car was pulled. He looked up. Her eyes did not flinch. "Who are you?" he asked, and she exhaled. "My name is Mara," she said. "I run the thrift store, and I have a son who plays baseball with boys whose fathers drink under the steeple. I saw you at the funeral. I watched Wade speak like a man who loved mercy, and I wanted to spit. Then I saw this ring when I was sorting boxes for the church sale, and I knew it belonged to someone who mattered, so I kept it. I told myself I would wait for a sign, and then last night the air went strange and I knew the sign was here." He closed the tin and captured the silver with his hand, the weight like a heartbeat in his palm. "Thank you," he said, and she nodded, glancing at the window as if the glass could grow ears. "There is more," she said. "Wade and the sheriff's brother meet behind the feed store on Wednesdays to count envelopes. The deputy at the counter is not blind, he just likes his pay on time. If you stand under the old cottonwood, you can hear their boots scrape on the concrete. And tonight, Wade wants fire. He wants a song of it. People like him always do. You are risking yourself," he said, and she laughed without joy. "I have risked myself every day since I stopped pretending to agree," she said, then her face softened. "They did not take your wife from accident," she whispered. "That road has fences, and men with wire cutters know how to open a fence at just the right moment. I have heard things, and I am done keeping those things, like poison in my throat. If you plan to leave, leave now. If you plan to stay, be smarter than rage. Rage is a rope they count on." He nodded, a small gesture that held gratitude and a promise, and Mara rose, leaving without looking back. The deputy watched her go with a face like a locked door, then flicked a glance at the man, a glance that tried to be casual and failed, and the man marked him in the column of those who might stand in the way or fall under the truth. When it came by noon, he had walked the length of the town like a ghost, memorizing alleys, sightlines, cameras that did not work, cameras that did, front doors with stickers for alarm companies that were mostly for show. He bought rope and nails from the hardware store and spoke softly with the owner, an old veteran with a missing finger and a quiet grief in his gaze, who said nothing helpful aloud but pushed a receipt across the counter with a pencil sketch of the backlot to the feed store. An arrow drawn to a blind corner, a single word scribbled in the margin. Echo back at the cabin, he moved with calm purpose. No heat in the motions, only clarity. He set lines across the trail at shin height, where the moss hid them. He smeared mud along the handles of the side door, so he could read the touch of a hand later. He lifted the floorboard beneath the table and placed the tin inside with the ring and a small recording device that could sing the truth if anyone tried to lift the wrong thing. He checked the batteries in a flashlight. He rolled his sleeves and washed the mud from his forearms. Slow, deliberate, as if a ritual could steady his heart for what was coming. He sat for a moment with the photograph over the mantel, her smile alive in the glass, and he let the memory fill him without breaking him. The sound of her laugh over the crackle of a cheap radio, the way she would tilt her head when she was right and wanted him to notice it, the night she made him promise to lay down his ghosts. "I want a life, not a legend," she had said, and he had promised because he believed he could. Now he understood that legends are not born by choice, they are forced by the hands of those who mistake cruelty for control. Dusk leaned into the trees. His phone buzzed once, a number he did not know, a single text that read, "Check your porch." He moved silent as a shadow and peered through the window. A small box sat on the step, no light in the yard, no engine noise, no footsteps. He opened the door, one breath, two breaths, then lifted the lid. Inside lay a memory card taped to a scrap of paper, and on the paper a line in block letters, Mile 19. He slid the card into a small reader and watched. No audio, just the grey image from a camera mounted high on a utility pole. Rain the day before the crash, headlights washing the bend near the fence, a pickup idling on the shoulder, two men cutting wire and hooking it to a chain, pulling a taut across the road at knee height, then melting back into the ditch as a car approached. His throat burned, but his hands did not shake. The car in the grainy image was hers. The moment of impact was a white smear, then stillness, then two men dragging the wire back and coiling it fast, the pickup rolling away without plate lights, the timestamp smudged but readable. His vision narrowed until only the faces mattered. One face turned toward the camera just enough for the jawline to match a photograph from the church newsletter. Wade, The other face wore the same grin he had seen in the courthouse. The sheriff's brother. He set the device down and breathed, slow, measured, counting to steady the river, grief carving space for a colder clarity that felt like steel in his spine. The truth was no longer a ghost. It had a shape, and a time, and a pair of faces, and the knowledge did not make him shake. It made him precisely rustle outside, then the low rumble of engines moving slow on gravel. He doused the lamp and slid into the corner where the shadows met. The lines he had strung lay waiting. The mud on the handle glistened faintly in the last pale strip of light. Voices rose at the edge of the yard, laughter in a key he knew too. Well now, the laughter of men who believe they are safely unseen. A figure came first, then another, 3, then 5, masks pale as moth wings in the almost night. A sixth hung back near the fence. Small, nervous, the boy, no, not the boy from morning, another boy, too young, a sacrificial offering to fear, his presence a tool to bind him to the group. The man marked him and felt a new weight drop into the scale. They filed toward the porch, boots careful, the leader whispering orders. And the man recognized the cadence, even through the cloth. Wade, of course Wade, and behind him the sheriff's brother, the set of his shoulders cocky, that careless swagger of a man who thinks his badge is a shield no one will dare to test. They reached the step and Wade raised a can sloshing with liquid that stank of fuel. That was when the line under the moss tightened as the weight of the third boot pressed it, a clatter as a length of chain swung down and hit the can, splashing its own poison across Wade's boots. The surprise snapped their formation. One turned, another grabbed air and found only the slick of rain on wood, confusion cracking through their ritual like a bad note in a hymn voice called out from the road. Sharp, official. Lights flashed across the trees, red and blue slicing the dark. A squad car rolled into view, and the deputy from the diner stepped out with a hand on his belt and a smirk that tried to be a smile. "Easy now, boys," he said. "This is not the time." And for a beat the yard went still. Wade's head tilted. The sheriff's brother stiffened. The deputy's eyes skimmed the cabin windows like a fisherman testing a line, and the man understood the scene all at once. The deputy had not come to stop them. He had come to stage it, to write a story that would say there was a minor dispute and no harm intended. A friendly warning, nothing more. The man's phone vibrated again. A new text from the unknown number. Back door, now. He moved like water, soundless past the table. His hand on the handle he had coated with mud. The smear told him it had not been touched. Good. He slipped outside into the sliver of yard that fell away into trees. A shadow detached itself from the trunk and stepped close. Mara, breath fast, eyes bright with terror and resolve. She put a small pistol into his hand. "My grandfather's," she whispered. "I did not bring it for you to kill with. I brought it so you could live long enough to do what must be done." And then she pressed a folded note to his chest. "Found this in the church donation jar this afternoon. Someone wanted it to be seen." He unfolded the paper, a list of names under a heading written in Wade's block letters. Ledger, dues and favors, beside each name a sum and a date. And halfway down the page his wife's name in cruel shorthand. The curve of the letters careless as a signature on a receipt. Next to it a number. And the words, "Bend and silence say breath," left him like a wave receding, leaving the shore raw and clean. He met Mara's gaze and saw her fear and her strength holding each other like two hands locked tight. "Go," he said. "Get to the creek and do not look back." She nodded, then paused. "If you need a place to bring a witness, bring them to my store. The storeroom door sticks." Kicklow left. They parted and he ghosted along the cabin wall until he had the yard framed. Wade and the others had recovered their formation. The deputy's cruiser idled like a patient animal. The boy at the back shifted from foot to foot, clutching his hood like a child holding a blanket. The sheriff's brother leaned into the deputy's window and said something that made them both laugh. Heat flared in the man's chest, and he let it pass like weather. Feeling only the weight of the moment that was coming, he stepped from the shadows with calm that did not wobble. His voice carried across the yard with hard clarity. "Wade," he called, the name cutting the night like a thrown blade. "You forgot to pay a debt," and the laughter died at once. Every head swung. Wade squinted, then straightened, his voice honeyed and false. "Now you listen, friend. We are here to talk neighbor to neighbor. We do not want trouble. The deputy here can vouch for our good intentions." The man raised his phone and tapped the screen once. The clip from mile 19 sprang to life on full brightness. Wade's face caught by the grainy lens, the sheriff's brother's grin lit by headlights, the wire strung like a snare, and the yard inhaled as one body. Even the deputy's smirk slid off like grease in cold water. Wade did not blink. He simply smiled. That calm the very rich and the very ruthless learn, and said, "That could be anyone. Neighbor, shadows lie." The man kept his voice level and his aim lower than rage. "The ledger too," he said, "names and numbers." And the silence now was a held breath that could cut. The boy at the back looked from one man to the other with terror blooming like frost. Wade's hand twitched toward his coat. The deputy's fingers drifted toward his belt. The sheriff's brother took one cocky step forward to speak. And that was when a shape sprinted from the tree line with desperate speed. The first boy, the one who had warned him at dawn. Stumbling and gasping, blood on his sleeve, eyes wild, he grabbed the man's arm and yanked hard. "They took my mother," he cried, voice breaking. "They have her at the Sawmill Road. Wade said he would trade her for your silence. Please, please." The yard erupted. Wade shouted. The deputy cursed. The sheriff's brother reached for the boy with a snarl, and the man turned just enough to keep the boy behind him while lifting the pistol Mara had given him, not to fire, but to show the line. "Hold," he commanded, and for a single shivering second the command tone froze them like winter. Then a rifle cracked from the dark hillside, and a red sight swept the porch rail like a serpent tasting the air. The shot had not been a miss, it had been a punctuation, a message of control. The man's eyes cut to the ridge, mapping angles, counting breaths, sensing how quickly this night could turn a dozen ways. And then from the road came another sound, the groan of a truck older than any cruiser, the creak of leaf springs under weight, and a shape rolled into view with its headlights off. A flatbed with a cage welded to its rails, and inside that cage a figure huddled in shadow, small shoulders shaking, a scarf jammed into the mouth, hands bound tight. And even before the truck clanked to a stop, he knew the shape was a woman, and that the boy's prayer had been nailed to iron. The driver leaned out and called to Wade, with the easy cheer of a man who thinks he is winning. "Got the insurance you asked for, boss?" The man's heart went quiet as ice, his breath even, his mind a clean room, because this was not the moment to burn. This was the moment to choose which fire to feed. He lifted his hands slowly, the pistol low, the phone bright with the proof of murder and ledger and night, and he spoke with a calm that carried across the yard like a bell. "You wanted a show, Wade," he said. "Here is mine. We are going to the Sawmill Road together. We are going to open that cage, and then we are going to talk where the pines hold the sound in a circle. Or you are going to force my hand, and every name on your ledger will hang on the church door at sunrise." Wade's smile thinned to a knife edge. The deputy's jaw clenched. The sheriff's brother's tongue worked behind his teeth like a snake, tasting air. The boy clung to the man's sleeve like a drowning swimmer to a rope. A breeze slid through the yard and made the torches gutter. The red sight returned to the center of the man's chest and held there, unwavering, and from the flatbed cage, the bound woman lifted her head. And though the scarf muffled her, he heard the sound she made, a ragged cry that carried a name only he and one other would recognize. A name that had been whispered on the night he made a promise to lay down his ghosts. A name that should not have been here in this yard under this sky. The woman spoke again with her eyes wide, in a face he knew from a photograph and a grave. And the world tilted, as if the earth itself had been cut loose from its anchors, because the name in that muffled cry was his, and the face in that cage wore the impossible outline of the woman he had buried. Alive, or a mirror meant to break him, he could not yet tell, but the truth would break open in the next breath, in the next move, in the next choice that would define who walked out of this yard, and who did not for a breath that felt like an eternity. He could not hear the engines or the wind or the whisper of leaves. He could only hear the sound of her muffled cry and the rustle of rope against the bars. A sound he knew from a memory of camping lanterns and laughing promises. A sound that did not belong in a steel cage on a flatbed under the eyes of men who wore hoods and grins like medals. The boy clung to his sleeve, voice shaking. "They said she was insurance. They said they would trade her for your silence. They said the sawmill has my mother. Please, please." And the plea made the yard breathe in jagged rhythm, because mercy was not a thing Wade enjoyed. Sharing, he liked the flavor of it, and the look of it when he owned it, but never the giving of it. Wade lifted his hand, calm as a serpent in warm rock. We can all be reasonable, he said, with the smoothness of a Sunday voice. Open the door, set the pistol down, let the deputy take your pretty video and your little list, and we will talk like neighbors. We will let the lady rest. We will see your concern about the sawmill. The deputy can escort. We are simple men of simple peace. The man did not move, his arm a shelter around the boy, his eyes tracking the ridge where the red sight had painted his chest. He felt the math settling, angles and timings and the weight of choices. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket with a single vibration that traveled through his bones like a drumbeat. Left fence. 3 words. No name. The same quiet ghost that had sent the mile marker truth. He slid his gaze and saw the shadow tucked along the split rails, a small flicker of glass, a scope pressed to a weathered cheek. The old hardware owner, Harlan, the missing finger, a notch on the rifle stock. His barrel not on the man, not on Wade, but on the ridge where the red light had just danced. Harlan's hat barely lifted. A slow nod, a signal older than radios. The man gave the smallest tilt of chin in return. Then he stepped forward with both hands visible, pistol low and pointed at dirt. His phone still bright with the frozen image of the wire across the county road. Wade's eyes tracked the light, and the deputy's jaw set with a kind of stubborn calculation that said he had bet on this hand for too long to fold clinkies. The man said, voice even as rain, we open that cage now. The boy and I walk the woman to the porch. Then we go to the sawmill together. Your men follow at a distance. You try to touch the phone or the ledger or the boy, and every name you keep for favors will sing out loud by morning. We decide this here and now. We end your habit of dark prayer. The sheriff's brother laughed, not with joy but with the sour bark of a man who thinks laughter proves he is fearless. He rocked on his heels. Easy there, soldier man, he said. Soldier man like an insult a child learned from a careless elder. We make the trades when Wade says so, not when you say so. And his hand twitched toward the latch on the cage, as if to show ownership, as if possession was a kind of blessing he could grant or withhold. Harlan coughed once, soft and dry, and the red sight on the man's chest flickered out like a dying ember. Up on the ridge, a dark shape folded into brush with the weight of a body that had lost its argument with gravity. The deputy's mouth opened, then shut, calculation punching through his swagger as he guessed how many eyes were on this yard. How many small acts of courage had seeded themselves in the last 12 hours while he was busy writing the next page of Wade's story? The man raised his free hand, palm open, slow, steady, a gesture that said choose. He pointed to the driver of the flatbed. Keys, now, and to the boy, stay behind my right leg, do not run, do not speak, breathe through your nose, and keep your eyes on the ground unless I tell you otherwise. The boy nodded like a swimmer locking breath before the dive. The driver glanced at Wade, and Wade gave the tiniest flick of fingers, reluctant but inevitable, and the keys slid across metal with a small hopeful ring. He was at the cage in 4 steps, turning the lock with care, reading the way the steel wanted to stick, keeping his body between the woman and any rifle that might wake on the ridge or the road or the deputy's hip. He swung the door and reached in, hands gentle, lifting her like a memory rescued from fire. Rope cut fast, scarf tugged free. Her face rose to his, rain streaking the dirt, hair tangled, eyes wild and fathomless. And then she did the thing that struck his heart like lightning. She tapped his wrist 3 times, quick and soft, the pattern from a world that had been gentle, their private code for I am here when words were too loud and rooms too crowded. Lena, he said, just her name, not a question, not a prayer, his voice a wire pulled tight to hold him upright. She nodded once, and her lips trembled with something like relief and something like warning. Not safe here, she breathed. Wade did not bring me for mercy. He brought me to make you choose wrong. They think grief will blind you. They think love is a leash. Do not let them be right. And her eyes cut to the boy, to the deputy, to the dark between trucks, reading the field like he did, fast, ruthless, alive. The deputy stepped in with his palm out, performative patience. Let me take the lady to the car, he said. We will make sure she is warm and quiet and attended. And the man smiled without humor. That will not happen, he answered. She stays with me until the sawmill is done. Then we walk to the courthouse together, and your brother can decide whether he wants to explain a wire to a state investigator or a grand jury of farmers who still know the smell of right and wrong. The deputy's polite mask cracked, and the edge under it flashed. "Careful," he said in a tone that tried to sound friendly and landed like a threat. "Careful is for men with clean ledgers," Alina whispered, eyes on the deputy, and the deputy's fingers twitched toward the radio. The sheriff's brother shifted. "Wait." Wade lifted the fuel can again with a patience that announced the moment he had chosen in his head. The man moved first. Not with rage, but with craft. His foot slid the chain he had rigged under the moss, lifting it just enough to catch the deputy's ankle when he lunged. The deputy staggered. His radio went skittering. The sheriff's brother grabbed for the woman and found a fist in his wrist and a twist that sent him to his knees with a grunt. Squeezed through clenched teeth, Wade flicked his lighter, a little golden grin in the dark, and Harlan coughed again. The lighter winked away as something hissed through air. A pebble or a pellet or a miracle of timing the yard burst into movement without turning into chaos. Because chaos is untrained fear, and this was not that. This was a man and a handful of allies using fear like a tool. The boy ducked under the woman's arm at the man's signal, shouldered to her hip, the three of them moving as a single shape to the porch. The deputy trying to recalibrate and failing, Wade stepping back with a smile that had changed, not smaller, smarter. A smile that said he had another card and he could not wait to play it. From the road came a second truck, not the flatbed, not a cruiser, a box truck with a slit near the roof for air, the kind used for livestock or furniture or things that lose value if anyone sees them too soon. The back doors banged twice from the inside and a muffled voice cried out with a word the boy recognized at once. "Mama." His body lurched and the man caught his collar and anchored him, eyes locked on Wade. "The sawmill is a mile of road we do not need," Wade said gently. "I brought the sawmill to you. We are neighbors, we deliver." The man read the locks, read the hinges, read the angle of the truck and the slope of the yard, and the way the driver wore his fear like a scent you could taste. He also read the woman in his arm. Elena had her weight, forward on the balls of her feet, ready to spring or cover or pull. Not a victim, a partner. The fact of her living in his grip was both a blessing and a trap. He could feel the mission in his bones tightening. A mission that had changed in a heartbeat and must not be allowed to own him. He lifted the phone high, thumb hovering over a message already drafted to 5 numbers he had queued for the moment. Proof would do more damage than bullets. State tips, local reporters who still filed hard stories, a public defender who hated bullies more than losing, a veteran nurse who ran the shelter across the tracks and knew how to whisper truth down a hallway, a judge whose brother had died in a mine collapse Wade had waved away as God's will. "You open the box truck," the man said. "You bring the woman to the porch. You back the vehicles down the hill and you leave. Or I press send and your ledger becomes scripture by breakfast." Wade's jaw worked like a man chewing a stone he did not wish to spit. He lifted 2 fingers and the driver jumped to it. Keys clattered, the door swung, and the boy's mother lurched into view with hands bound and eyes swollen and relief crashing over her face like a wave when she saw her son. The boy broke and the man let him go, because some breaks are the right ones. He stepped between Wade and the porch to keep the line. He watched the deputy watching him. He watched the sheriff's brother climb to his feet with murder in his eyes and calculation. Crawling after it like a colder animal, they made the exchange in a silence that rang. Boy to mother, mother to porch, porch to door. Alina pulling them into the cabin and pushing them low behind the table, where the floorboard had room for the ring tin and now for 2 shaking bodies and a single breath anyway. The man felt the tremor move through the cabin like a pulse, a beat. That said, lives had been snatched back from the script Wade had written. Wade felt it too, his face slick with a smile that looked like a promise. "Enjoy your reunion," he said. "We will finish the sermon at the place where men learn humility." And he jerked his chin to the box truck. The driver slammed the door. The engine grumbled. The deputy climbed into his cruiser and clicked the radio with a code that would pull others to the sawmill road like crows. To a shine, Harlan did not lift his rifle again. He melted backward into the fence shadow and was gone like old weather. The yard emptied. The last hood turned. The last tire bit gravel. The red and blue lights slipped away, and the night folded itself back into cricket and tree and distant engine. The man stood in the margin of it and let the quiet settle like ash inside. The cabin, the boy clutched his mother, and the mother clutched the boy, and Alina stood apart with her shoulders straight, tears on her cheeks, and a blade of steel under them. She looked at the photograph above the mantel, and then at him, and he saw. the same realization slid across her face that had cut him earlier. The truth was not a rumor anymore. The wire, the ledger, the names, all of it, and she nodded once, ready to spend whatever courage she had left. He knelt by the floorboard and lifted the tin. He placed the ring in her palm, and her fingers closed around it like she was catching a falling star. She kissed his knuckles once, fast, then spoke. "We cannot run. They will hunt us across counties and plant flags on our backs. We have to end it where it began. We have to break the pulpit that feeds them. But first we have to crack the sawmill open and show the town the bones inside it." The boy's mother nodded with a fire rising in her eyes. "I will testify," she said, voice shaking but not weak. "I will stand on the courthouse steps and say their names." The man looked at each of them and saw the cost. He weighed it, and it weighed him. Then he stood and gathered rope, flashlight, the small recorder. He tucked the phone into a pocket where he could touch it with one breath and trigger the message if the night turned. He nodded to Alina, and she nodded back. A warrior nod, not a lover's. And they stepped into the dark together. The boy watching from the doorway with a face scrubbed raw by fear and hope. The sawmill road stank of wet pine and oil, a place where sound went to circle in the rafters and come back mean. They moved along the ditch out of headlight paths. The box truck sat near the office, with its doors open now like a mouth breathing slow. The deputy's cruiser idled in the back lot, with the lights off. More trucks tucked under the trees like wolves at rest. Voices carried in that false jolly pitch men use when they are about to do something that deserves to be named by its true name. Wade's voice among them, patient and cruel, promising the end of a story that was not his to end. Elena touched his wrist, 3 taps again, then pointed to a side door half hidden by stacked pallets. He read the hinges, rusted top, clean bottom, a door used enough to be trusted by those who used it. They ghosted that way, Boots finding the blind stones by habit. His hand found the latch, his breath counted. He pulled. The door gave with a complaint that sounded like a moan, and then swallowed them into gloom. The scent of sawdust and old rope and water in a place it should not be. A low hum of generators shaking the floor like distant thunder. They slid along, AWOL, and found the stairs down. Not stairs really, more a ladder with ambition. The old cistern below the mill where runoff pooled when the rain was hungry. He listened, a faint clink of metal on metal, a voice too small for the warehouse above, a voice that said please, and was answered by a laugh he recognized. The sheriff's brother, and above that laugh another sound, the scratch of a match, the flutter of flame, the promise of smoke. Wade liked fire for its spectacle. He liked what it did to evidence and to courage. The man handed Alina the flashlight, and she held it low, cupped in her palm, the beam a thin ribbon along the boards. They descended. The air got colder. The smell of damp concrete and old fuel and fear rose like mist. Water shone below, not deep but wide, ripples tapping the ring of the cistern, as if the place itself wished to speak. Across the water a shape hunched on a crate, with hands bound to a pipe. A woman whose breath soared in and out. He could not see her face because of the scarf, but he could see the terror in her shoulders. Another captive. Another life added to the ledger, as if people were lines on a page. He stepped onto the narrow catwalk that crossed the cistern, boards slick with algae, nails proud in the dark. Alina, behind him with her palm against his back, measuring his balance with hers. Then a clatter above, a door thrown, laughter spilling, boots on boards, and Wade's voice called down with the cheer of a ringmaster. "Welcome to confession, neighbor. Time to pour out your heart." And then the hiss of a valve, and the groan of a pump, and the rush of water kicked to life. The level in the pit, rising with a hungry speed. A bucket brigade for the devil. He ran the rest of the catwalk with a grace learned under worse skies. He reached the woman on the crate, and cut the rope in one sweep, while Alina steadied the pipe with her shoulder. The woman sobbed into the scarf, and he ripped it away and saw the face of Mara, blood at her hairline and fury in her eyes, even through the pain. They took Harlan at the fence. She gasped. He made enough noise to pull the watch from the ridge, and they dragged him here. They wanted me to trade your path for his life. I told them to choke on their own smoke. He smiled with sorrow and pride together, and tied a line around her waist. "We are going back across," he said. "We are going to breathe air they do not own." A thunder of boots above, a splash at the far edge where someone had kicked a board into the water. A laugh, another splash. The pumps hummed deepening as the generator throttled up. the level climbing fast enough to kiss the soles of his boots, and then a new sound. A click under the catwalk like teeth finding bone. He froze and looked down. A wire stretched across the last 3 planks, a simple trap with a cruel mind behind it. Pulled the weight, and you closed the gate behind you. You drowned slow while they pray loud upstairs. He lifted Mara and passed her carefully to Alina. He shifted his own weight to the anchor bolt in the wall. He eased the wire up with his knife and felt the tension sing. Not a crude trigger, but a conductor to a relay. A spark waiting to jump to something that would turn a small room into a sun. Fuel lines coiled under the boards like sleeping snakes. He breathed and stopped the breath halfway, his voice low. Back 2 steps, slow. Do not scrape the rail. Elena's hand tightened on Mara's shoulder, and they moved together like one body. And the wire hummed in his fingers like a struck string, singing of choices and consequences above them. Wade's voice poured down like oil. Come on, neighbor. We are almost done. You can let go now. The water lapped the lowest rung of the ladder. The pump growled. The relay ticked once like a metronome. He saw the future as a line of bright white that tore families apart. He saw the other future as a darkness that swallowed names. He carried both for a heartbeat and then chose a third. He wedged the knife between the wire and the bolt. He shoved his belt through the loop to hold the tension. He slid a length of rope around the catwalk rail, wrapped it twice around his arm, braced his knee against the pipe, and whispered to Alina, "On 3 pull Mara hard, and do not stop. 1 toother." Third count never reached the air, because a door above slammed and a new engine coughed to life. The generator stuttered, the lights flickered, the pump choked, and a shape leaned over the hatch with a silhouette that froze all of them for one raw beat. Not Wade, not the deputy, not the sheriff's brother. A man in a dark coat with a white collar and a silver flask in his hand. Pastor Cole, the smile on his face warm enough to melt candles, his voice honeyed enough to sweeten poison. "Brothers," he called, "let us witness what righteous water can do." And he tipped the flask in benediction while the relay clicked again, and the wire sang, and the belt creaked, and the rope burned his forearm. The catwalk shivered. The cisterns swelled. Mara clutched Elena. Elena locked her jaw and pulled. The man felt the whole contraption choose between breaking and holding, and in the half-second before it made up its mind, he glanced up and met the pastor's eyes, and in that gaze he saw not faith but appetite, not duty but delight, and he knew that the pulpit was not a shelter in this town, it was a weapon, and the hand that held it was about to strike. The wire shifted, the knife bit deeper, the relay ticked again, and the room filled with the hot smell of sparking metal as the water climbed another inch, and the choice sharpened like a blade on bone. And in that breath between ruin and rescue, he understood that someone unseen had to cut the right chord, or they would all be swallowed. And the unseen hand moved because a shadow at the hatch jerked, and the smile above them cracked. But whether it cracked from surprise or from triumph, he could not yet tell. The relay clicked like a metal heartbeat. The wire sang in his fist. The pump roared its greedy rush, and then a thin hand snapped into the scene like a knife through curtain. A length of rebar hooked the generator belt and levered it off the wheel with a rasp that bit the air. The motor coughed and died. The water stilled to a sullen swirl. The shadow at the hatch leaned in, and he saw the hat brim and the missing finger and the set of a battered jaw. Harlan, blood at his temple, eyes bright with stubborn life. The old man lifted 2 fingers in a salute, as casual as a porch greeting, then sagged back from the opening with a grunt that said he had paid for the trick with pain he would feel in the morning if morning still came. The wire slackened. The belt in his fist stopped, trying to saw his skin. Alina pulled Mara across the last treacherous boards with a grip that knew exactly how to keep a body steady on slick wood. He slid the loop free and eased the knife out of the bolt. The relay ticked once in protest and went quiet. Upstairs a door banged, voices flared. Wade barked orders in that calm theater voice he liked to use when he wanted men to believe disorder was still under his hand. Pastor Cole murmured something about patience and purpose. The sound floated down like sugar dust over poison. They moved fast up the ladder with the flashlight cupped low. Harlan lay on the floorboards beside the hatch with his breath ragged and his smile refusing to surrender. They found a length of tape on his wrist and peeled it away. He whispered left corridor and a hand signal that meant to men. The man nodded and slid along the wall, Alina at his shoulder. Mara, behind with the flashlight shuttered under her palm, so it only bled a ribbon of dull light along the baseboards. At the corner he caught the reflection of a boot in an oil sheen, and timed the turn to take the first man's breath without breaking his windpipe. The second lunged with the pipe and found empty air and a wrist locked. Knee to plank, pipe to floor. The kind of quick work that leaves bruises and choices instead of graves and ghosts. They reached the side door under the pallets and slipped out into wet pine and cooler air. The box truck still idled near the office like a patient beast. The deputy's cruiser had moved to angle the headlights at the cistern hatch. Wade and the sheriff's brother stood together in a V like men who had rehearsed their righteous stance in a mirror. Pastor Cole sipped from his silver flask with the air of a man blessing cattle before slaughter. The old mill's ribs carried the echo of their talk, a hush inside it like a church, holding breath before the first hymn. The man kept his people in the trees and counted hearts, his Elenas, Maras, Harlans counting shallow with pain. The boy and his mother safe at the cabin for now. The Count steadied him. The Count told him what he could spend and what he must save. Mara pressed a small envelope into his hand, the paper damp but the ink inside sealed. "Ledger copy," she whispered. "Pages the size of a handbill, numbers and names, the pastor's tithe." Line flowing backward into Wade's envelopes. The sheriff's brother listed as ferryman on nights when the road bent for money. The deputy marked as usher, with amounts that matched the cost of silence in a town this size. And near the end, a line with Elena's name reduced to careless initials, a sum, and the word bend. She stared at that word, like she might set it on fire with her eyes. Harlan grunted something that sounded like enough talk and tried to stand. His knee buckled. The man caught him, and Harlan pushed at his arm with a snort. "Not done yet," he said. "Not while men who never bled tell us the shape of Godlin's hand found the man's wrist." 3 taps, then a new pattern. 2 slow, 1 quick. Old code, "For we go loud soon, but not before we aim." He nodded. He unlocked his phone. The clip from mile 19 ready. The photo of the ledger page ready. The short recording of Wade ordering fuel ready. He drafted a single message with 3 attachments and a line of truth as clean as a blade. Names, proof, the mill, send. "If I go dark." He set it to a dead man, switched link to his pulse on the watch strapped inside his sleeve. A soldier's ugly little gift to himself. Insurance that courage could not be strangled by a rope at the last second. They circled to the creek bed that ran behind the chapel on the hill. A trickle now after the storm, the stones slick, the air sweet with wet hemlock. The church rose above the trees like a ship on a grey sea. White paint glowing soft, stained glass catching the last light and bending it into stories for people hungry to believe the best of their own shadows. Elena stopped and spoke in a voice that chose truth over comfort. "The crash did not kill me," she said. "A volunteer pulled me from the ditch before Wade's men returned for the wire. He took one look at the tire tracks and said, 'Old trick, old sin.' Then he tucked me in a feed barn and called a nurse with a soft voice and a hard spine. They hid me while I healed. I did not call you because they said they saw your face at the morgue. They said you were breaking in a way that would make you kill until there was nothing left of you." She touched the ring in her pocket and breathed. "When I heard Mara whisper ledger into a donation jar, when I heard the boy whisper mile 19 to his mother in the thrift store aisle, I came back. I always come back." And the words hit him like rain on a wildfire, hissing and saving at once. He kissed her forehead with a touch quick as a vow, and turned to the plan they had sketched in fragments across a day that refused to end. Force the pulpit into daylight, make the confession public, keep the phones rolling, get the captives into the aisles with names and faces visible, deliver proof. 2 people who still remember how to be ashamed, corner Wade and Pastor Cole between their God words and their ledger numbers. Make the deputy choose between badge and brother. Draw the sheriff's brother into the light, where his grin looks like what it is. A wolf showing teeth to Lamsey cruiser slid onto the church lot from the road, with lights off. The deputy stepped out alone, his hat in his hand, his face a map of a man who knew the ground had shifted under him. He lifted both hands like a man walking into his own house after a fight, and said low enough to be almost a whisper, "I saw the video clear this time. Not on a phone in a yard, on a screen in the station. I saw the wire. I saw my brother's face. I am not the kind of man I told myself I was." And he swallowed the bitter thing in his throat and held out a ring of keys. Side door, Storage hallway. Green box kills the lights to everything but the exit signs. There is a panel under the choir. Riser my brother wired to lock the doors if a switch by the organ drops. Pastor calls it a safety protocol. I call it a box trap with stained glass mirror's jaw set. You waited until now, she said, and there was no softness in it. The deputy took the hit and did not argue. He nodded like a man who accepts a debt that will last. Then he said one more truth, with the courage of a man who knows he might not finish this night. They wired a small canister under the pulpit, not enough to level the building, enough to scatter fear. Wade thinks the hint of fire makes faith look fierce. My brother thinks smoke makes stories slippery. I think you both already knew they were cowards. Now you know they are dangerous cowards. The man took the keys and the knowledge and weighed them. He watched the deputy's eyes and saw a break forming that might hold. He gave a short nod that said, "Earn the rest with your feet, not your mouth." Inside the side door, the storage hallway smelled like wet hymnals and copier toner. Alina moved with him, sensory memory guiding her past the coat rack, the baptismal wardrobe, the fuse line that crooked past the restroom door. The green box sat where the deputy had said. He lifted the cover and saw the rows of switches like levees against flood. He flipped the bank-marked stage and organ and left the exit lines live. In the sanctuary beyond the double doors, the murmur of people swelled. The county comes when the bell rings, he thought. They came for warmth and for the chore of being seen in the right place, for a handshake from a deacon who might hire a son, for a smile from a pastor who knows their middle names, and he felt a fierce love for them and a fierce anger at the men who treated that love like a herd. To be driven, they fanned along the back wall and took stock. The pews half full, work coats in Sunday dresses, and the uneasy shuffle of children, told to hush. Wade near the center aisle with his chin lifted and his hands spread like a conductor welcoming strings. Pastor Cole at the pulpit with his flask tucked unseen under the shelf. The sheriff's brother beside the organ with one hand near the carved panel that hid the lock switch. The deputy slipped in at the far aisle and stood with his back straight, as if his posture could cancel his past. Harlan leaned on the doorframe, white with pain but steady. Mara held her phone low and lived. The boy's mother had not come because safety had to be a promise kept at least once tonight. The boy had obeyed the order to stay. The man tasted that obedience like a small miracle. Elena squeezed his arm once, then stepped into the aisle without asking permission, her hair still damp, her face unhidden, her presence rippling across the pews like wind across wheat. A woman in the third row clapped her hand to her mouth and whispered her name. A man in the back stood and sat again, like a man trying to swallow a memory that did not fit his throat. Pastor Cole saw her and blinked once and recovered with a smile that could sell sugar to a bee. "Sister," he said, in a voice built to travel, "what a blessing to see you returned to us. God's river is full of miracles. Come, stand here and tell how the Lord pulled you from the dark ditch of despair." And his eyes shone with the performance of it, while his hand drifted toward the pulpit shelf, where the little canister waited like a bad idea. The man lifted his phone high and cast the mile 19 clip onto the wall with the cheap projector meant for scripture verses and youth group slides. The wire glowed like a snake across the county road. The pickup idled. Wade's face and the sheriff's brother's grin took on the flat horror of truth when shown large. A gasp rolled the pews from front to back. Then a hush so deep a whisper could have cut through it. Wade laughed, a sound that tried for dismissive and landed in the dirt between his boots. Pastor Cole opened his hands like a man calming cattle and said, "The devil can make pictures out of shadows if a man's heart is bitter." And Elena's voice cut through his syrup with a blade edge. "My heart is not bitter, my heart is awake," she said, and she pointed to the ledger page on the wall. Names big as house numbers, entries and envelopes, and the word "Bend" sitting beside her initials like a bruise you cannot hide. And the sanctuary flinched as if struck. The sheriff's brother twitched toward the organ panel and the deputy called out in his old parade voice, "Do not," and for a breath it worked. The brother hesitated, his jaw flexing, the small man behind the big grin thinking about the calculation now that the herd was looking. Wade lifted his chin and tried to retake the field with an old trick. "Shame is not for us," he said. "Shame is for people who do not understand the price of order." He stepped toward Alina with a hand extended, the hand of a man who has put his palm on many shoulders and left fingerprints no soap could lift. The man stepped into that space and took Wade's wrist and turned it with a pressure that spoke of deserts and rooftops and split-second choices. Wade went to one knee with a hiss of breath. The sanctuary exhaled. The deputy took one step toward his brother and said his name like a man trying to recall an earlier version of a face. And Pastor Cole smiled wider and wider until his smile looked like a tear opening in cloth. Pastor Cole slid his hand under the pulpit edge and found the small switch that would whisper a charge into the canister. Not enough to burn the church down, enough to fill the room with smoke and panic, and the kind of story that gets told with the wrong names for years. The man saw the flex of the pastor's wrist and turned, and in that same beat, the boy's mother's phone feed in Mara's hand began to ping with hearts and comments and names from farther towns. The story already spilling beyond this room, the story refusing to be folded into smoke. And still the pastor committed his small arson, because men like him believe in spectacle, even when truth is brighter. The organ thrummed with a low shiver as the sheriff's brother palmed the carved panel and pushed the lock reels under the double doors clacked, metal teeth finding grooves. The aisle lights flickered off under the cut bank. The exit signs glowed their stubborn green. The air took on the first whisper of chemical bite as the canister under the pulpit kissed a filament and began to warm. Wade snarled on one knee and spat a broken prayer that sounded like a threat. Alina moved with the surety of a dancer who had trained under fire. Her hand closed over the pastor's wrist, and the pastor's eyes showed the first honest thing they had shown all night. Fear. The deputy reached for his brother, and his brother shoved him hard into the nearest pew. Harlan lifted his rifle like a staff and struck the organ bench so the panel snapped shut again. The congregation rose in a wave and then hesitated, in one quivering body, not yet stampeding, not yet brave, waiting for the next line to tell them whether they were witnesses or a mob. The man felt the whole night lean toward a cliff. He felt the send button hot under his thumb. He felt the phone pulse with the promise that truth could leave the room even if he did not. And in the same breath he saw a small figure slide along the side aisle with a set of wire cutters and a face wet with fear and courage. The first boy, the cousin who had said no, his knees shaking, his jaw set, heading for the panel by the pulpit, where the canister cable snaked like a viper in a garden. Someone had promised was safe. Elena's grip tightened on the pastor's wrist. Mara lifted her phone higher so the comments stacked like a wall against. Forgetting, the deputy crawled back to his feet with blood on his lip and something like a prayer in his eyes that had nothing to do with the man at the pulpit. Wade's free hand crept toward the knife on his boot as slowly as a thought he hoped no one else could hear. The sheriff's brother braced to run or to strike and had not yet chosen which man he wanted to be. The congregation's breath gathered. Like a storm cloud, the canister hummed with heat. The doors clicked again like teeth closing, and the boy reached the cable and lifted the cutters with both hands while looking at the man as if to ask for a father. He had never had to tell him when to squeeze. The man met the boy's eyes and gave one slow nod, a nod that carried weight and permission and the whole rusted machinery of a town about to decide its shape. The cutters bit, the cable jumped, the canister hissed like a snake, denied its strike. Pastor Cole jerked and Alina held him as if holding a live wire and said loud enough for every ear to hear that the house of the Lord is not a house for cages. And in that same instant Wade tore free and slammed his shoulder into the man, and the phone flew from his hand and skittered under the front pew, screen glowing with the message unsent, the dead man's switch still counting, the send still a breath away, and Wade's knife flashed like a bad idea made metal as he lunged toward the boy in a final old cruelty, and the whole sanctuary moved as one body toward a single choice as the bell rope stirred in a draft, and the stained glass shook, and the moment balanced on the edge of a blade, where mercy and justice and fury met, and none of them would wait much longer. Wade lunged with the knife, and the blade caught the glint of the sanctuary lights like a falling star. The boy froze for a breath, cutters still in his hand, eyes wide with the kind of fear that seals a moment forever. And then the man moved with the sure speed of training sharpened by grief and love. His arm cut across the arc of the knife, wrist to wrist, bone striking bone. Wade's blade skittered sideways and dug into the wood of the pew with a crunch. The boy stumbled back. Alina yanked him into her arms. Wade snarled and tried to wrench free, but the man's grip locked down like iron and turned the knife into the floorboards with a twist that cracked Wade's knuckles like brittle wood. The sheriff's brother broke first, shoving through the nearest row. trying to reach the side aisle where his escape might still breathe. The deputy tackled him low and hard. The crack of bodies against pew legs rang out. The congregation gasped, some rising, some sinking, fear and courage battling in every face. Mara's phone stream captured the chaos, her voice steady as she narrated names and deeds. Pastor Cole struggled under Elena's grip, his silver flask clattering down the pulpit steps. His honey smile cracked open to show the worm beneath. Wade roared and tried to bring his knee up. The man pivoted, let the strike glance off his thigh, then slammed Wade's shoulder into the pulpit with the same force he had once used to breach doors overseas. The wood shuddered, the canister under it rolled free, hot but silent now that the cable was cut. It clanged across the floor and landed at the feet of the congregation. Men and women stared at it with dawning horror, realizing what it was, realizing what it meant, realizing who had placed it there in the house where their children sang hymns. Boy's voice rose, high but strong. Wade tried to kill my mother. Wade tried to kill him. Wade killed her, pointing to Elena with his hand shaking but sure. Wade's face twisted into something between rage and fear, and for the first time his composure cracked enough for the whole room to see the bully beneath the cloak of power. His threats spilled out, wild and ragged. You think this town will believe you? You think they will turn on me? I own the land. I own the law. I own the bell rope swayed again in the draft, and with it came a sound older than Wade's ledger. The deep iron throat of the bell calling out across the valley, struck not by hand but by storm wind that had slipped through a cracked window. The sound cut through his rant like a blade through cloth, and the congregation's silence turned from fear to fury. The deputy forced his brother to his knees, blood running from his nose, his voice raw. I saw it, he shouted. I saw the wire. I saw the ledger. I am done lying. And his confession broke the last thin wall. People rose, voices layered, names hissed and shouted. Women cried out in betrayal. Men roared for justice. The sanctuary became a storm not of panic but of awakening, the weight of years lifting in one surge of truths. Pastor Cole tried to call for calm, tried to pour syrup over fire, his words about devils and shadows spilling fast. But Mara lifted the phone higher and said into the live stream, "This is the devil, this is the shadow." And the world beyond these walls saw his face as it faltered, saw the ledger pages taped to the altar rail, saw Alina alive and burning with truth beside her husband, saw Wade on his knees, pinned by scars he could never understand. The man bent low to Wade's ear, voice steady as stone. You killed for silence, but silence is gone. You tried to erase love, but love is standing. You think you own this town, but this town is remembering itself. And Wade spat blood onto the floor in reply, a curse that landed with no power, because the people had already taken the power back. Alina released Pastor Cole to the grip of 3 farmers who had carried their daughters to Sunday school under his gaze for years. They held him fast, the flask spilling across the aisle like the last lie he could not contain. The deputy cuffed his own brother with hands that trembled but held. Mara spoke names into the camera, her voice clear, her eyes blazing. The ledger lines read aloud, like scripture rewritten, each number a nail. In the coffin of the clan's false faith outside, the storm broke open again. Rain hammering the roof, thunder rolling like artillery. But the bell continued to sound in the wind, each toll a heartbeat, each toll a mark of a town waking from a nightmare. And in that ringing, the man felt his chest unclench for the first time since the county road. Elena's hand slid into his, warm, alive, scarred but unbroken. She whispered 3 taps against his skin. I am here, and his eyes closed just long enough to breathe. The sheriff's brother was dragged to the aisle, Wade bound with his own belt, Pastor Cole weeping honeyless tears, the deputy speaking into his radio with a voice no longer twisted to cover lies, the congregation moving as one to bar the doors until state law arrived, until cameras from outside would see what had been done, until proof could not be folded back into shadows. The boy stood on a pew and lifted the wire cutters above his head like a trophy. The first act of a new story. The mother clung to him, her face wet with both terror and pride. The man looked at Alina, and in her eyes he saw not only survival, but defiance, not only grief, but the beginning of healing. And he knew then that revenge had already served itself. Because the worst punishment for men like Wade and Cole was not death in the dark, but life in the light, stripped of masks, stripped of hoods, stripped of power, and forced to face the people they had poisoned. When the state troopers arrived at dawn, they found the congregation awake and alive, the ledger in hand, the canister displayed, the live stream still rolling, the bells still tolling in the storm wind. Wade and his brother and the pastor shackled by the hands they had once counted as weak. The deputy standing guard with his badge, heavy but clean for the first time. The man and Alina side by side, scars bared, truths spoken, no more shadows to crawl into later. When the troopers asked why he had stayed, why he had not run, he answered with a voice calm and steady, because running lets them write the ending, and sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to live so. Fiercely the living cannot forget. Alina touched his shoulder and whispered, sometimes losing everything is the only way to find who you are. And her words wrapped the night into its final shape. A truth born from pain and carried into dawn. The boys' laughter rose in the morning light. The town's silence broke into talk that carried hope. The storm passed, the air smelled clean, and the man who had once been hunted now stood unchained, not as prey, not as predator, but as witness and survivor and husband. Reclaimed. The story closed, not with revenge but with renewal, not with fire but with the bell still ringing. A reminder that hate can wound, that lies can scar, but that truth, once spoken aloud, never dies. The end.